basically, I don't want to say it, chain people to the earth and kind of like
right.
do exactly the opposite of what the mantras were created to do. It's just pretty interesting to look at that you know, it's nothing that's really being imposed upon us. It's more or less of what when you really get down into the nitty-gritty of what is in our shadow and what we actually repress in many ways, what we harbor in our psyche, a lot of this is self-imposed and self-inflicted, you know, pretty much just coming from us. We impose a lot of this on ourselves.
Absolutely, and I guess that can actually get us into a little bit of the topic of DNA, because again, there are studies being done to show the fact that language has a huge influence on DNA and the structure of DNA. It can be remodeled, if you will. It can be restructured. It can have all kinds of effects depending on the language that we use or the language that we speak, and also that ties in with thought, of course, the what we think. And the question is, do we also think in the language that we speak in? And does that reflect then the internal world? Any ideas about that, Ben?
Well, absolutely. There's actually more research by Leonard Horowitz. I just a few months ago read his book DNA, Pirates of the Sacred Spiral, and he gets one quote I have right in front of me actually is, he says that 1/3 of the sensory motor cortex of the brain is devoted to the tongue, oral cavity, the lips, and speech. In other words, oral frequency emissions, spoken or sung, exert powerful control over life, vibrating genes that influence total well-being and even evolution of the species. So right there, he pretty much sums it up. Yeah, you're definitely right on when you say that language and speech and just the harmonics and the frequency of our language do affect our DNA in many ways. Because what is DNA? He gets into it in his book, but there's, you know, tremendous research showing that DNA is really a receptor and a transmitter of frequency, of what Bruce Lipton would call the field out there. It's just a transmitter and receiver. It's not a genetic code that defines who we're going to be for the rest of our lives. Like in the old model of thinking about what the genetic code really is, it's a predetermined characteristic that you're going to live with for the rest of your life. But we know this, especially through Dr. Bruce Lipton's work, is that is absolutely not true. We, you know, just through consciousness and just through our concepts of the world, our ideals and our concepts of the outside world filter the information, the environmental signal that's entering us filters through our central nervous system and our concepts and ideas first, before it goes to, you know, down to a cellular level, which then starts to breed what our body, what kind of manifestation our body's going to take on, you know, from that point on. So DNA is really not, you know, a set code that you're pretty much stuck with for the rest of your life. It is very transitory. It is very fluid, and it has to do more or less with Heart Math Institute even gets into the just the electromagnetics of emotion and how that affects DNA. And that right there is extremely interesting because let's see, I have some quotes by them, but basically what they postulate is the fact that there's an electromagnetic frequency that comes both from the central nervous system, the brain, and from the heart, and there's a two-way communication system between the heart and the brain. Yet the heart actually sends more of what you would call a communication to the brain than the brain does to the heart. The heart actually... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Jed. I think the microvolts, exactly as you say, I've read this as well, that the microvolts from the heart actually is more than from the brain.
Absolutely. Yeah, and they say that it's to such an extent that the electromagnetic field that is produced by the heart, it generates such a strong rhythmic electromagnetic field in the body that it can actually be measured in people, in the brain waves of people around us. And that right there is interesting enough. That's, I mean, you could call that the extended mind or what, but that's actually a form of communication that's not coming from the brain. It's coming from the heart. It's an electromagnetic field that is picked up in the brain waves of the people around you.
Yeah.
So
right.
Not only can our heart communicate with our own brains, which it does, but it communicates with those around us. So yes. there's definitely a field around us, and that's, that gives so much credence to the fact that we are literally just, we are a vessel, that we receive information from the field and then we interpret that and then give that back. And that definitely affects the physical world around us, whether through, through photons and phonons. It definitely affects the physical world around you. So, I mean, that right there should, give a little bit of hope. The fact that, some people say, oh, poor me, I really can't, what can one person do to affect change in this world? Well, right there, you're already affecting change and you don't even know it. You're already, introducing your ideals into the world, and it's affecting people that are close by.
Exactly. And also that's why I think that it is so important to the controlling forces of this world, those people who are trying to control this planet, that they should keep everyone within the same kind of mind frame, the same thinking pattern, the same, of everything. Basically, they're creating this kind of monoculture where everyone is thinking the same, doing the same, and they're roboticizing what we can see is the robotification, if you will, of the human species. And that's one thing I think why it's so important for them is because they can use the energy of that if we, constantly are within the same mind frame, and we'll be more easily controllable. And you have a number of things to their advantage that would come out of that. And also we know, of course, about the development of all these kind of electromagnetic different weaponry that they're developing now, things that actually affect us on an electromagnetic level. And this could radically change our behavior, for instance. Or we have these new reports coming out now that they actually are trying to remove what they call depression through the aid of electromagnetic fields. They just very lightly, stimulate the brain with an electromagnetic field, and that will actually make you to shift your attitude, or your depression could disappear. And some people would think that that's good or an advantage, of course, but it can obviously be used on a much more nefarious level. So that's why it's important to be aware of this stuff. And do you think, Ben, that ultimately all these things, all these technologies, the development that they're doing now, all of that stuff actually can be resisted on a kind of a spiritual level, if you will? Or do you think that we're doomed if they bring these types of technologies along?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I absolutely believe that there is there's nothing that we cannot control in the external world, and that I can give a complete scientific example of that. Let's say we know that there's effects that come from our cell phones, vibrations, and like the power lines, vibrations that come from power lines, cell phones, microwaves, electronics, things along those lines that can, in very minute ways, but over long periods of time, affect you on a physiological level. And what the most amazing amount of research with this is the fact that there's two systems in the body, one being the visceral and one being the somatic. And the somatic, and this is actually going into a lot of Bruce Lipton's research that's going to be in the film. The somatic is the musculoskeletal system within our body. So that really has to do more with fight or flight. So it's what happens when you're in that sense is more of a defense mode, and that's the somatic mode. But the visceral mode is actually in your organs, more of like the center mass of your body. It's in your organs, and that has to do more with growth and reproduction.
Sorry, yeah.
Bless you.
Thank you.
So the visceral system has more to do with growth and reproduction, and the somatic has more to do with defense and the fight or flight response from the body. And the interesting thing about this is that in Bruce Lipton's work, he gets into how our emotions play on our physiology. So in an environment where we're receiving consistent, and believe me, the environment doesn't have to send any specific signal. We know this with our psychology. We can interpret our environment in any way. We can interpret a good situation. If you're a pessimist, you can interpret a good situation as, well, there's got to be something wrong with it, so I'm going to steer clear of it, and vice versa. So it's really just our ideas and concepts that filter the environmental signal coming in. So when you see that there's, especially on our media, there's really no good news that you ever see. It's always either bashing one candidate or another. It's either talking about food scares, E. coli, don't eat this, don't do that, don't go here because there's danger of like a terrorist attack. Don't fly this airline. Watch out for this. It's pretty much nothing but fear filtering in through the media. And when that enters into our body, what that literally does is that removes us from our natural organic state of our visceral growth and reproductive state, which is where we should be most of the times. That's a relaxed state where we're focused on growth and reproduction. It pushes us from that, and it pushes all of the energy and the blood flow to the musculoskeletal system into a fight or flight and defense mode. And what's interesting about that, all of this has to do just with our concepts and our ideas. Now, at any given time, when you're under a tremendous amount of stress, you're automatically in that fight or flight mode, and at any given time, we have however many pathogens already in our body. We have influenza. We have, the common cold. We have this, that, and the other already present in our body. It's not the fact that most of the time, it's not the fact that we come into contact with a strain or a virus or a bug or something along those lines. Usually it's the fact that our stress level lowers our immune system, and that's what allows these external things to affect us in a way. So that right there is a great way to see that just through our consciousness, and I do a lot of research into how spirit is evident in the physical world through consciousness and through thinking. So in our concepts, there's a way that the external world definitely can physically affect us. But there's also a way that if we choose to see the world as dangerous, then we are going to be living in that somatic system to where we're consistently have a lowered immune system, we're consistently in the fight or flight mode, and we're consistently in the defense mode. And getting a little bit more into how this is symbolic and how it plays out on a major scale, just look at our nation. Or pretty much any nation at that fact, but especially the superpowers. Look at how much money they pump into defense. Yeah. That right there is a symbol to what's going on a personal level within us. We're a fractal of our nation. Our nation is our society, it's our extended mind. So it's pretty much representing the fact that everything's a scare, and in the media, everything's a scare, not just on its own, but also to encourage people to basically bow to these forces that are saying, yes, we need to throw this amount of money into Iraq, we need to throw this amount of money into our military, we need our defense truly built up in many ways. Okay, well, what about growth and development? What about growth and reproduction here in our own nation? We're throwing so many millions upon billions of dollars overseas. What about us? What about us right here in this nation? Growth, prosperity, and that would be the visceral system. But since we're so far removed from the visceral system of our growth and development, you don't see any of that in our nation anymore. It's really, and that's when you see that all this globalization, the breakdown of sovereign borders. That's really what you're seeing. So, long story short, basically, yes, there are these technologies that can, in fact, affect us on a physiological level. But the only way that it's really that big of an issue is if we allow it to be. And I'm not talking about don't fear electromagnetic waves coming from HAARP or this, that, and the other. That's the surface of it. You need to get down to the core, the root of the illness that we're fighting on a level of all of humanity. There's an illness that's raging, like the parasite that we were talking before. Yes. We need to figure out what the root cause of this illness is before we can ever affect change in the physical world. So it really, it's actually so much less of a physical battle. It is literally just a spiritual battle that we're fighting here. And the biggest problem is